Lord Seventh
is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 8. Instant Recollection. Minister Jian was worthy of being a wily old fox and glossing over expert, and Jing Qi had underestimated his level of shamelessness. Following the latter's own reaction to what had happened, the former didn't go run into a pillar, nor did he run into a wall, nor did he even wail, then fuss, then hang himself. He straight up rolled his eyes up into the back of his head, locked up both his legs stiff, and passed out. Nice. By saying nothing right now, he could thus bypass everything. Helian Yi slightly tilted his face up, Zhao Mingji's poignant, enraged cursing plus the frequent exchanged war of words between the official crowd gradually numbing him slightly to hear. Both his eyes somewhat lifelessly raised, and he unwittingly made the same exact motion of looking upwards that Wuxia did. Sensing that his own eyes were distressed, he wanted to angrily bellow, "All of you shut up," wanted to slap the table to draw everyone's attention and say, "Take a look at your group of Confucian sons and imperial pupils, what sort of trash is it made of?" Wanted to state those people who undermine the sanctity of the court, as well as that malicious Nanjiang scum, are all to be dragged out and cut down. But he couldn't say anything, nor could he do anything. He was merely a surplus person who had just barely been allowed to attend the reception. His East Palace reputation was empty, and there was no need to talk of any real authority, as people would sneer at even anything he'd say. One step was not to say too much, and another was not to misstep. He still had his older brothers eyeing him like tigers, waiting to pull him off his horse, and this was exactly like walking on thin ice. How was he be able at all to care about someone else's affairs? Recalling Grand Tutor Zhou's historical lecture, the man had said that when a nation freshly died, villains would certainly arise. The Great Hall was as it always was, but the Great Qing's sky was on the verge of collapse. Towards this farce, Jing Qi looked on and wanted to laugh, but Helian Yi wanted to cry. Regardless of wanting to laugh or cry, though, their frames of mind were both alike. Nevertheless, Wuxia knelt there calmly, exceptionally undisturbed. He didn't feel himself to have done any wrong, and had no regrets. The man people were calling Eldest Highness was nearly poking him in the nose with his extended finger, and though he couldn't comprehend the majority of the words he heard coming out of his mouth, he knew they weren't good ones. His hazardous motives are sufficient for punishment. The meaning being to kill him. Wuxia understood that much. He turned his head to look at eldest scion Helian Zhao, who was abnormally agitated, as if he had some sort of profound animosity, and thought to himself that if he had known earlier they would kill him because of this, then he wouldn't have set off the passion parasite just now, but make that old, bed-headed Jian guy bleed from every orifice and go meet the dead ghost of his father. Their Vasa clanfolk of Nanjiang were the uttermost of genuine-natured people. They ate when they were hungry, even if it was on tree bark or weeds. They slept when they were tired, even if the sky was their canopy and the earth was their mat. If they bumped into someone they liked, then they would be with her all their life, treating her well with their mind eternally unchanged about it. When friendly visitors came, they would treat them with good wine, the entire world within the four seas able to be their brothers. When coming across enemies, there weren't so very many insincere titles, and it didn't matter whether there was a reason to go to war or not. Hatred in one's heart was something the other party had to repay in blood, and if it could be resolved by skinning them, then they would be skinned. If the foe could not be beaten, and one was killed by them, there were still their friends, family, and brothers in the clansmen, so long as the Vasa were not exterminated, that hostility would be passed down from generation to generation. What was unheard of was a Vasa man who had been bullied by someone outside and then cowardly hid away, resembling the sort of Central Plainsmen that only dared to hold a grudge in their mind, and resembling the sort of wild dog that only dared to salivate ravenously at the side, waiting until the opposite side got unlucky and fell into dire straits before they would dare to bolden up and step forward to stomp and spit on them. He thought that the great shaman telling him to bear with it was, as a matter of fact, wrong. For the sake of his kinsman, he must not bow and kneel even more so. As a man who represented Gaz, if even he turned into a person who could only wag his tail, beg pitifully, nod his head, and bend his back, what was the clan to do, then? This was too sorrowful of an era. Prosperity had since seen a decline, and the wings of heroes had not yet broadened. Only able to watch as wimps went rampant, children suppressed their dissatisfaction and indignation down into their hearts. They were made to grow up in powers like this, all the way until they overturned their wrath onto the entire world, morphing it into a devastating force. Jing-Chi gradually stopped smiling, then softly sighed, having a pinch of the powerless feeling of an outsider. He'd thought the chaminette somewhat wretched at first, as he was only at such a slight age yet would avenge any spiteful look, not having the least bit of tolerance for people. As he watched Wuxia now, though, as he was kneeling wordlessly dead center, he felt that the kid's eyes were actually just too dark, not evil, but too stubborn. The way he stared coldly at people seemed like that of a young beast which had been injured and couldn't move, proudly putting on a tough front. Eldest scion Helian Zhao kowtowed once on the ground with vigor. "Father Emperor, this is the shape of a country in upheaval. If he isn't killed, I fear that it will chill the hearts of all officials in court." Second scion Helian Chi just chuckled. Elder brother's words are truly focused in on execution. Nanjiang is an untamed land that's unaware of etiquette, and he is no more than a babe too small to even be pinched. In your view, if you don't force Father Emperor to kill this tiny child, then the former would be disregarding the state and country, destroying the Great Wall, and chilling the hearts of a court full of officials both literary and military. I'm not sure, whose heart has been chilled, gentlemen. His gaze turned to the side. Helian Chi's appearance was remarkably similar to that of his mother, consort Shuang, the tips of his eyes raised up high. He had a bit more of a soft air for no reason whilst he was moving, but when he turned bearing a fake smiling expression, it wasn't soft, it was enigmatic. Were one to be observant, they would immediately know that the following words were that anyone in question had better be clutching the gold branches and jade leaves of a royally descended family, and if their status wasn't sufficient, they ought to shut up as soon as possible. Even Sir Zhao Mingji, who was reluctant to be alive a moment ago, extinguished his voice and no longer sought death. "What is the meaning of this?" Helian Zhao responded angrily. Helian Chi had a skin-deep smile. "I'm just giving my own opinion. Don't mind it much, elder brother, this younger brother won't speak. If I've offended you, do forgive me lots." This court of the Son of Heavens was one filled with his own hand-picked officials. Helian Yi, finally seeing enough, spoke up. "Father Emperor, this serving son feels slightly unwell." Helian Pei looked at his youngest son, then discovered that his face was indeed awfully sallow, the color on his lips even seeming to have faded away, and he was faintly trembling a bit. "Oh? What's wrong?" he thus asked. "Someone come and help the crown prince down, and invite an imperial physician over." Eunuch Shi hurriedly struck a greeting, then personally lent his arm to support Helian Yi. Jing Chi watched the youth's back, thinking that it was drooping a tad. He then witnessed Helian Pei waving his hand impatiently. "All right, what's with the noise? What does this look like? All rise for us." He shot a glance at Wuxia, who was kneeling there as ever, and eased up his tone a little. "Chaminette, you stand up, too." His fairly joyless sight swept once over his two adult sons. The sage Confucius once said, "If the citizens' paths go according to law, and punishment is used for compliance, they will avoid that and be shameless. If their paths go according to virtue, and etiquette is used for compliance, they will have shame and behave." He is but a trifling, ignorant child that has never been enlightened. A benevolent person should disarm with kindness and endure with courtesy. How could one kill someone right after they say so? If he is killed and word circulates about the matter, will that not be teaching the people of the world to laugh at my great Qing's monarch and subjects for having no magnanimity at all, killing indiscriminately in a tyrannic rule? Jing Qi rolled his eyes, thinking to himself that listening to this monarch's remarks could really cause one to go hang themselves on a southeastern branch. "How old are you?" Helian Pei asked Wuxia with an amicable face. "Did you read books in Nanjiang before?" Wuxia was taken aback. "I, 11. The great shaman is my teacher, but I haven't read your Central Plains books." Helian Pei shook his head, utterly sorry for him. "What a shame, what a shame. The marvel of reading books thus lies in happily discussing them some, all the way from the sages of the past down to the younger generations of today. Isn't that wondrous? It's just a shame that you're in a remote location, and have never had a taste of this most enjoyable thing, AUD. Beiyuan." Jing Qi jumped, caught off guard from being suddenly named, and quickly bowed. "This subject is here. Cough, you kid, you didn't even let out a breath for such a long time, we narrowly forgot about you." Helian Pei looked at him weird. "How come you're at so young an age, yet are as boring as a little old man? We heard that you, aside from entering the palace to pay respects, haven't left the estate for a good few months. This subject is bearing heavy filial piety and does not dare to rush." Helian Pei sighed, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. "Though Mingj was of a different surname, he was like a brother to us. Never mind. You need to look after yourself, Beiyuan. We know you're being filial, but don't stifle yourself so hard. The shamanette's capital residence presently hasn't yet been built, so there's no choice but to wrong them with having to stay in a post house. A guest coming from far off cannot be neglected, and we see that he and you are more or less the same age. He's unfamiliar with Han, but has no obstruction in everyday talk. Since you're the same age, you'll be able to talk a bit, so you'll have to properly entertain him on our behalf." Jing Qi mentally rolled his eyes super hard, but his mouth was obliged to be respectful. "This servant accepts your decree." Helian Pei nodded, then spoke to the chaminette again. "This is our great Qing's Prince Nanning. He is considered to be of equal status to you, and this is not considered an insult to you faraway guests. You will be a long-term resident of the capital in the future, so getting Beiyuan to get you closer with the children of noble families would also be good. Yi." He only spat out one word before recalling that Helian Yi had just reported ill and been helped out, so he frowned slightly. Circling his gaze around the great hall once, the tinge of helplessness flashed past on his face, and he hesitated for a moment. "Where is the Consul Herald?" "This subject is here," Consul Herald Chen Yuanshan quickly replied. Helian Pei nodded. "Good subject Chen, I will have to bother you quite a bit more with the many matters of the Nanjiang folk being in the capital. This subject will abide by your order." Helian Pei needed the space between his brows, not concealing the tiredness on his face, and stood up with a shift of his sleeves. That's enough for today, we are weary. Everyone disperse. A eunuch promptly came forward. Helian Pei supported himself on the young eunuch's arm, walked a few paces, then seemed to remember something, turning to look back at Jing. We heard Yi say that you said that when your health was a bit better, you would request yourself a tutor in the prince's estate, and not enter the palace to study with him, he asked in a lowered voice. Jing froze. Your Majesty, this dynasty's regulations. The man just shook his head and cut him off. If you're unwilling, then we'll let it be. You're big now, and know things. Later on, we will point you to a teacher whose knowledge and quality of character are both first-rate. When you get free time, come into the palace to keep us company more. Our many years of care for you has not been in vain. He finished speaking, turned, and left. Jing suddenly remembered that, during his previous lifetime, Helian Pei had in fact vaguely hinted that he would refer him one then, too, and he wouldn't need to enter the palace again. It was simply that his own mind was thinking of Helian Yi at the time, so he hadn't caught what he meant. The official crowd saw the emperor off, then departed in succession. Helian Qi bowed towards Helian Zhao with his hands clasped in front, beaming. The latter, face cold, huffed, swept out his sleeves, and left all of that was observed by Jing who was thinking that this idiotic emperor turned out to not be completely idiotic on the inside after all. In addition, he had genuinely hitherto planned for Jing and clued for him to not get swept into the ugly struggle of these sons of his. Unfortunately, he was young back then, and Helian Pei's hard effort was wasted. He abruptly felt that the emperor was truly nothing more than a lonely, pitiful man, unable to freely act. Not far away, Consul Herald Chen Yuanshan was in the middle of speaking with Wuxia. The former was polite to everyone, and was presumably not too offended by the chaminette whose temper was like a beast of burden's. The emperor's decree had already come down, so it would be overall bad if he just called out hello and didn't even commit to perfunctorily heading over. Thus, he tidied up his face into a smile on the spot before he went over to Wuxia. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.